The desert dust swirled around Catherine Lawson's ankles as she trudged forward, her brother Samuel's thin arms wrapped around her neck, his frail legs dangling uselessly against her back. The Arizona Territory of 1878 showed no mercy to those who were weak, and even less to those who chose to bear another's burden. But Catherine had made a promise to their dying mother 3 years ago that she would keep Samuel safe, and she intended to keep it even if it meant carrying him 15 miles to the next town after their wagon wheel had splintered beyond repair. "Cat, you should leave me," Samuel whispered, his voice as dry as the landscape surrounding them. "You could make it to Sagebrush Creek before sundown if you weren't carrying me." "Hush now," Catherine replied, adjusting her grip on his legs. At 22, she was strong from years of working their small homestead alone, but even her strength had limits. They had been walking for 4 hours, and her muscles screamed in protest. "I'm not leaving you, and that's final." The unforgiving sun beat down on them as Catherine squinted at the horizon. Their water supply was dangerously low, just half a canteen between them, and the heat was becoming unbearable. Samuel, only 12, had been unable to walk since the fever took his ability to use his legs 3 years prior. The same fever that had claimed their mother. "There's a rock formation up ahead," she said, trying to inject hope into her voice. "We'll rest there for a bit." As they approached the outcropping of rocks, Catherine felt a flicker of unease. The desert was home to all manner of dangers: rattlesnakes, coyotes, and sometimes men who were worse than either. She had her father's old revolver tucked into her belt, but with Samuel on her back, she'd be slow to draw if trouble found them. She carefully lowered Samuel onto a flat boulder in the shade, then sat beside him, passing him the canteen. "Small sips," she reminded him. Samuel took a careful drink before handing it back. "Do you think Papa will be waiting for us in Sagebrush Creek?" Catherine felt the familiar ache in her chest at the mention of their father. "Maybe," she replied softly, "if his business in Santa Fe is done." The truth was, she hadn't heard from their father in 8 months. John Lawson had left them at their homestead with promises to return with money and supplies. But as the months had passed, Catherine had been forced to make difficult decisions. When the well began to dry up and their food stores dwindled, she had sold most of their possessions to buy a wagon and supplies, determined to take Samuel to Sagebrush Creek where her father's cousin lived. Now, with their wagon abandoned miles back, she was beginning to doubt her plan. "I see dust," Samuel said suddenly, pointing toward the horizon. Catherine squinted in the direction he indicated and saw a cloud of dust rising in the distance. Someone was approaching on horseback fast. Her hand moved to her revolver as she stood, positioning herself in front of Samuel. As the rider drew closer, she could make out the silhouette of a man on a large chestnut horse. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face, and his duster billowed behind him like a flag. A cowboy, by the looks of him. "Stay still," she whispered to Samuel, her finger hovering near the trigger of her gun. The rider slowed as he approached, raising one hand in greeting or perhaps to show he meant no harm. Catherine didn't lower her weapon. "Afternoon, madam," the stranger called, his voice carrying across the distance between them. He stopped his horse about 20 feet away, respecting her obvious caution. "Couldn't help but notice you and the boy out here. Not the safest place to be resting." "We're just passing through," Catherine replied, her voice firm despite her exhaustion. "Heading to Sagebrush Creek." The man nodded, his eyes taking in their situation: the lack of a horse or wagon, the boy unable to stand, Catherine's protective stance. "That's a good 15 miles from here." "Mind if I come closer?" "I mean no harm." Catherine hesitated, then gave a terse nod, though she didn't lower her gun, As he approached, she got a better look at him. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 25 or 26. His face was tanned from the sun but clean-shaven, with striking blue eyes that stood in stark contrast to his sun-darkened skin. A star-shaped badge glinted on his chest. "Xavier Zimmerman," he introduced himself, tipping his hat. "Sheriff of Sagebrush Creek." Catherine felt a small measure of tension leave her shoulders, though she remained wary. "Catherine Lawson. This is my brother Samuel." Sheriff Zimmerman dismounted with fluid grace, his movements those of a man accustomed to the saddle. "You folks have a wagon breakdown." "The wheel shattered about 4 miles back," Catherine explained, finally lowering her gun but keeping it in her hand. "We had no choice but to continue on foot." The sheriff's eyes moved to Samuel, taking in his thin frame and the way his legs hung limply. "Your brother, he can't walk." Samuel answered before Catherine could. "I had the fever 3 years ago. Took my legs, but not my life. Cat's been carrying me since the wagon broke." Xavier Zimmerman's expression softened, and something like admiration flickered in his eyes as he looked at Catherine. "That's quite a burden to bear, Miss Lawson." "He's my brother," she replied simply, as if that explained everything. And to her it did. The sheriff was quiet for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the vast, empty landscape around them. "Night's coming soon. The desert gets dangerous after dark. Coyotes, rattlers, not to mention the occasional bandit. I can't in good conscience leave you out here." Catherine stiffened. "We'll manage." "I'm sure you would," Xavier said, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "but there's no need. I've got a strong horse and plenty of daylight left." He gestured to his mount, then looked directly at Catherine. "She carried a crippled boy on her back," he said, his voice gentle but filled with a kind of quiet respect. "I'll carry you both." The offer hung in the air between them. Catherine felt Samuel's hand on her arm, a silent plea. Her pride warred with practicality. They needed help, and this man was offering it. "Why would you help strangers?" she asked, suspicion edging her voice. Xavier's smile deepened, reaching his eyes. "Because I'm heading back to Sagebrush Creek anyway, and because it's the right thing to do." He paused. "And because I've seen what happens to folks who try to cross this stretch alone. I'd rather not have to bury another family." His blunt honesty silenced Catherine's objections. With a reluctant nod, she accepted his help. Xavier approached Samuel first, his movements careful and respectful. "Mind if I lift you up, young man?" Samuel shook his head, and Xavier gently gathered the boy in his arms, carrying him to the horse with ease. Catherine watched as he secured Samuel in the saddle, making sure the boy had a good grip on the pommel. "Your turn, Miss Lawson," Xavier said, turning to her. He must have seen the hesitation in her eyes because he added, "I'll walk and lead the horse. You'll ride behind your brother." Relief washed over Catherine. She hadn't relished the idea of being pressed against a stranger, sheriff or not. With Xavier's help, she mounted behind Samuel, her arms encircling her brother to keep him steady. The sheriff gathered their meager belongings, the nearly empty canteen, a small bundle of food, and the blanket Catherine had been using to secure Samuel to her back, and tied them to the saddle. "Ready?" he asked, looking up at them. Catherine nodded, and Xavier began leading the horse at a steady pace, his stride long and unhurried. The desert stretched before them, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. As they traveled, Xavier pointed out various landmarks, naming rock formations and telling stories about the land. His voice was a pleasant baritone, and despite her initial wariness, Catherine found herself relaxing slightly. "How long have you been sheriff?" Samuel asked after a while, his natural curiosity emerging now that they were safer. "Going on 3 years now," Xavier replied. "Took over when the old sheriff retired." Before that, I was a ranch hand over at the Diamond B. Do you like being sheriff? Samuel pressed. Xavier chuckled. Most days. It's quiet in Sagebrush Creek for the most part. Every now and then, we get some excitement, usually when the cattle drives come through, or when the miners from up north decide to blow their earnings at the saloon. Catherine listened to their exchange, studying the man who had come to their rescue. There was a quiet confidence to him, a steadiness that she found reassuring. His hand rested loosely on the gun at his hip, not in a threatening way, but with the casual readiness of someone accustomed to dealing with danger. "What about you, Miss Lawson?" Xavier asked, glancing back at her. "What brings you to these parts?" Catherine hesitated, reluctant to share too much of their story with a stranger. "We're heading to Sagebrush Creek to stay with family," she said, offering only the barest details. "Might I ask who?" Xavier inquired. "It's a small town, I likely know them." "Martha Lawson," Catherine replied. "She's my father's cousin." Xavier's step faltered slightly. "Martha Lawson," he repeated, his tone careful. "The widow who lives on Pine Street." Catherine nodded, a cold feeling settling in her stomach at his reaction. "Is something wrong?" Xavier was quiet for a moment, seemingly choosing his words. "Martha Lawson passed away this past winter," he said gently. "Influenza. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you." The news hit Catherine like a physical blow. Martha had been their last hope, their only remaining family in the territory. She felt Samuel stiffen in front of her, and she tightened her arms around him, as much for her own comfort as for his. "I see," she managed, her voice hollow. "Thank you for telling us." They continued in silence, the weight of this new development heavy between them. Catherine's mind raced, trying to formulate a new plan. They had very little money, no home, and now no family to take them in. As if reading her thoughts, Xavier spoke up. "Sagebrush Creek is a good town with good people. There's work to be found for those willing. And until you get settled, there's a room above the jail that I use for visitors. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and safe." Catherine was immediately suspicious of such generosity. "We couldn't impose. It's no imposition," Xavier cut in. "It sits empty most of the time. Would be nice to have it put to good use." Before Catherine could respond, a sound caught her attention, the distant rumble of hoofbeats. Xavier heard it too, his posture suddenly alert, his hand moving to his gun. "Get down, both of you," he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. Catherine slid from the horse, then helped Samuel down, cradling him against her as they crouched behind a large boulder. Xavier positioned himself in front of them, his body between them and whatever approached. 5 riders appeared on the horizon, moving fast. As they drew closer, Catherine could see they were rough-looking men, their faces hard, their clothes dusty and worn. "Stay quiet," Xavier whispered, drawing his gun with practiced ease. The riders slowed as they approached, spreading out in a semicircle. The one in the center, a tall man with a scarred face, grinned at Xavier. Well, if it ain't the sheriff of Sagebrush Creek," he drawled. "Long way from home, ain't you, Zimmerman?" "Jackson," Xavier acknowledged, his voice cool. "Thought you were headed to Mexico after that business in Tucson." The man called Jackson laughed, a harsh sound. "Changed my mind, found some opportunities north of the border." His eyes shifted to Catherine and Samuel. "New friends of yours?" "Travelers headed to town," Xavier replied evenly. "Nothing that concerns you." "Traveling light, ain't they?" Jackson observed, his gaze lingering on Catherine. She fought the urge to shrink back, instead meeting his stare defiantly. "Pretty too." Xavier's grip on his gun tightened. "They're under my protection, Jackson. I suggest you move along." The tension in the air was palpable. Catherine's hand moved to her own gun, though she knew she stood little chance against 5 armed men. Jackson seemed to weigh his options, his eyes calculating. Finally, he nodded. Always were the righteous type, weren't you, Sheriff? Another time, perhaps. He turned to his companions. Let's ride, boys. The sheriff here is spoiling for a fight, and we've got places to be. With that, the riders wheeled their horses around and galloped off in the direction they had come from. Catherine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Xavier waited until they were well out of sight before holstering his gun. Zeke Jackson and his gang, he explained, turning back to Catherine and Samuel. Cattle rustlers, mostly, though they've been known to rob stage coaches when the opportunity presents itself. You know them well, Catherine observed, helping Samuel back onto the horse. Xavier's expression darkened. Too well. I've been trying to bring them to justice for 2 years now, but they're slippery. They know the territory better than most. He assisted Catherine onto the horse before resuming their journey. We should move faster. They may circle back. The remainder of their journey passed in tense silence, Xavier setting a brisk pace. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the desert floor, when Sagebrush Creek finally came into view. It was larger than Catherine had expected, a proper town with a main street lined with buildings, not just the cluster of shacks she had imagined. As they approached, she could make out a general store, a saloon, a small church, and various other establishments. People moved about their business, some pausing to watch as Xavier led his horse into town with 2 strangers aboard. Sheriff's back, someone called, and several townsfolk approached, curious about the newcomers. Xavier raised a hand in greeting but didn't stop to chat, leading them directly to a modest building with Sheriff painted above the door. He helped Samuel down first, then Catherine, carrying the boy inside while Catherine followed with their meager belongings. The jail was clean and orderly, with 2 cells along one wall, a desk in the center, and a wood stove in the corner. A door at the back presumably led to the room Xavier had mentioned. Just through here, Xavier confirmed, opening the door to reveal a simple but comfortable-looking room with a bed, a small table with 2 chairs, and a washstand. The privy's out back. There's a bathing room at the hotel down the street if you've a mind for a proper wash. Catherine stood in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sudden transition from the vast, dangerous desert to this safe, enclosed space. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, for everything. Xavier nodded, setting Samuel carefully on the bed. I'll bring some food over from the cafe. You 2 rest. We can talk more tomorrow about arrangements. After he left, Catherine sank onto the edge of the bed beside Samuel, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. What are we going to do now, Cat? Samuel asked, his voice small. Catherine squeezed his hand. We're going to rest tonight, and tomorrow I'm going to find work. We've managed before, Sam. We'll manage now. But as she spoke the reassuring words, Catherine couldn't help but wonder if she was making promises she couldn't keep. True to his word, Xavier returned shortly with a tray loaded with food, hot stew, fresh bread, and even 2 slices of apple pie. He set it on the small table, then excused himself to attend to his duties, leaving Catherine and Samuel to eat in private. The food was the best they'd had in months, and both ate until they could eat no more. After washing up with the water from the pitcher on the washstand, Catherine helped Samuel prepare for bed, then lay down beside him, listening to his breathing even out as he fell asleep. Sleep eluded Catherine, however. Her mind was too full of worries and plans, and the memory of Xavier Zimmerman's steady gaze as he'd offered to carry them both to safety. Morning arrived with the sounds of the town coming to life, wagons rolling past, people calling greetings to one another, a dog barking somewhere nearby. Catherine rose carefully, trying not to wake Samuel, and went to the small window. Sagebrush Creek was bathed in the golden light of dawn, the buildings casting long shadows across the dusty street. People were beginning to go about their daily business, a woman sweeping the boardwalk in front of what looked like a millinery shop, a man unloading goods at the general store, children running toward what must be the schoolhouse. A knock at the door pulled Catherine from her observations. She opened it to find Xavier standing there, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt beneath his vest, his sheriff's badge gleaming. "Good morning," he greeted her, his voice low to avoid disturbing Samuel. "I thought you might want some breakfast, and perhaps a chance to discuss your situation." Catherine nodded, glancing back at Samuel's sleeping form. "Let me leave him a note. He'll be fine for a bit." After scribbling a quick note and placing it where Samuel would see it when he woke, Catherine followed Xavier out of the jail and across the street to a small cafe. The smell of coffee and bacon greeted them as they entered, and several patrons called out greetings to the sheriff. Xavier led her to a table in the corner and pulled out a chair for her. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes approached immediately. "Morning, Sheriff," she greeted Xavier, then turned a curious gaze to Catherine. "Morning, Mrs. Fleming. This is Miss Catherine Lawson. She and her brother arrived in town yesterday. Miss Lawson, this is Mrs. Fleming, owner of the best cafe in the territory." Mrs. Fleming beamed at the compliment. "The only cafe in 20 miles, more like. What can I get for you two this morning?" After placing their orders, Xavier leaned forward slightly. "I've been thinking about your situation, Miss Lawson. I believe I might have a solution, temporary at least, until you decide on a more permanent arrangement." Catherine braced herself, unsure what to expect. "I'm listening, Mrs. Fleming here." Xavier nodded toward the cafe owner, who was now busy behind the counter. "Recently lost her assistant to marriage. She's been looking for someone to help in the kitchen and with serving. And as for lodging, there's a small cabin behind her house that she's willing to rent for a reasonable sum." Catherine was taken aback by the offer. "You arranged all this overnight?" Xavier smiled slightly. "It's a small town, Miss Lawson. Word travels fast, especially when it involves the sheriff bringing two strangers into town draped over his horse." Mrs. Fleming returned with their coffee, and Xavier took the opportunity to introduce the idea to Catherine directly. "Tell Miss Lawson about the position you have available, Mrs. Fleming." The older woman's face lit up. "Oh, it would be a blessing to have help again. Early mornings and long days, I won't lie, but the pay is fair and you'd get your meals here. The cabin out back is small, but it's got a proper bed and a stove, perfect for you and your brother." Catherine was overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Mrs. Fleming urged. "At least come see the place after breakfast. If it doesn't suit, no harm done." Catherine looked from Mrs. Fleming's hopeful face to Xavier's steady gaze. She thought of Samuel, of the uncertainty they faced, of the dwindling coins in her purse. "I'd be grateful to see it," she finally agreed. Their breakfast arrived: eggs, bacon, potatoes, and biscuits with gravy, and Catherine ate with genuine appetite for the first time in weeks. As they ate, Xavier filled her in on the town and its inhabitants, painting a picture of a close-knit community where neighbors looked out for one another. "What about Samuel?" Catherine asked between bites. "While I'm working, he can't be left alone all day." Xavier considered this. "The school teacher, Miss Winters, might be willing to have him at the school. He could learn alongside the other children, even if he can't participate in all activities." The thought of Samuel having the opportunity to learn and interact with other children warmed Catherine's heart. He'd been isolated for so long with only her for company. After breakfast, Mrs. Fleming showed Catherine the small cabin behind her home. It was indeed modest, just one room with a curtained-off area for the bed, a small stove for cooking and heating, and simple furnishings. But it was clean and solid, with a porch that caught the morning sun and a view of the mountains in the distance. "The privy's just there," Mrs. Fleming pointed to a small structure nearby. "And you're welcome to use the pump in my yard for water. There's even a little garden plot if you've a mind to grow some vegetables." Catherine tried to imagine her and Samuel living here, having a home again after months of uncertainty. "It's perfect," she said softly. "What would the rent be, Mrs.?" Fleming named a sum that was more than fair, especially considering the wages she was offering for the cafe work. "And I'm flexible about when you start," she added. "I imagine you'd like to get settled first." By midday, the arrangements were made. Xavier helped Catherine move their few belongings from the jail to the cabin, then accompanied her to retrieve Samuel. The boy was awake and anxious when they arrived, but his eyes lit up when Catherine shared the news of their new home and the possibility of attending school. "Really, Cat? I can go to school?" The excitement in his voice was something Catherine hadn't heard in a long time. "We'll need to speak with the teacher first," she cautioned, "but yes, if she agrees." Xavier carried Samuel to the cabin, setting him on the porch so he could take in his new surroundings while Catherine arranged their belongings inside. Despite the simplicity of the space, it felt like a luxury after months of transient living. "I need to make my rounds," Xavier said as he prepared to leave. "But I'll stop by the school and speak with Miss Winters about Samuel, and perhaps I could bring you both to dinner at the cafe this evening, as a proper welcome to Sagebrush Creek." Catherine wanted to refuse to assert her independence, but the genuine warmth in Xavier's invitation was hard to resist. Besides, she reasoned, it would be an opportunity for Samuel to see more of the town. "That would be nice," she agreed. "Thank you." As Xavier walked away, Samuel tugged at Catherine's skirt. "I like him," he said simply. Catherine watched the sheriff's retreating form, his confident stride and straight shoulders, the way he tipped his hat to the townspeople he passed. "Yes," she found herself saying. "I think I might like him too." The following days fell into a rhythm faster than Catherine could have anticipated. She began working at the cafe, quickly learning the routines and preferences of the regular customers. Mrs. Fleming was a patient teacher and a kind employer, allowing Catherine breaks to check on Samuel until they were certain he was comfortable in his new environment. Xavier had spoken with Miss Winters, who had readily agreed to have Samuel join her class. The school teacher, a young woman with progressive ideas, had arranged for one of the older boys to carry Samuel to and from school each day, and made accommodations so he could participate fully in lessons despite his physical limitations. For the first time since their mother's death, Catherine felt a sense of stability returning to their lives. The people of Sagebrush Creek had welcomed them with an openness that surprised her, offering friendship and assistance without pity or condescension. Even Samuel was thriving, his natural intelligence and cheerful disposition making him popular among his classmates. And then there was Xavier. The sheriff had become a regular presence in their lives, stopping by the cafe during Catherine's shifts for coffee, escorting her home in the evenings, bringing Samuel books from his own collection. His kindness extended beyond mere courtesy, but he maintained a respectful distance that Catherine appreciated, never presuming or pushing for more than she was ready to give. One evening, about 3 weeks after their arrival in Sagebrush Creek, Xavier invited Catherine for a walk after she finished her shift at the cafe. Samuel was attending a special evening lesson at the school. Miss Winters was teaching the children about astronomy and had planned a stargazing session, so Catherine was free to accept the invitation. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, following a path that led to a small creek that gave the town its name. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and a cool breeze offered relief from the day's heat. "Samuel seems to be settling in well," Xavier commented as they reached the creek and stopped to watch the water flow over smooth stones. Catherine smiled, thinking of her brother's excited chatter about his new friends and lessons. "Better than well. I haven't seen him this happy in years." She turned to face Xavier. "I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for us." Xavier shook his head. "You've done the hard part, Miss Lawson, carrying your brother all that way, keeping him safe, making a new life here. I just pointed you in the right direction." "Catherine," she said suddenly. "Please call me Catherine. After all we've been through, Miss Lawson seems too formal." A smile spread across Xavier's face, reaching his eyes. "Catherine," he repeated, as if testing the feel of her name on his tongue. "Then you must call me Xavier." They continued their walk, the conversation flowing more easily now that this small barrier had been removed. Catherine found herself sharing stories of her childhood, of her parents before her mother's death and her father's departure, of the dreams she'd once had for her future. In turn, Xavier told her about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to a Comanche raid when he was 16, about making his way to Arizona Territory and finding a purpose in upholding the law. "What made you decide to become a sheriff?" Catherine asked as they turned back toward town, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Xavier was quiet for a moment, considering. "After my parents died, I drifted for a while. Did some cowboying, worked cattle drives. Ended up in some trouble, nothing serious, just the kind of mischief young men get into when they're angry at the world." He paused, seeming to collect his thoughts. "There was a sheriff in a small town in New Mexico who could have thrown me in jail, but instead he gave me a job. Taught me that a man's worth is measured by how he treats those who can't defend themselves." Catherine thought of how Xavier had found them in the desert, of his immediate offer to help without expectation of reward. "He taught you well," she said softly. Xavier smiled, a touch of melancholy in his expression. "I try to live up to his example, not always successfully, but I try." They had reached the edge of town, the lights from the buildings creating pools of warmth in the gathering darkness. Xavier stopped, turning to face Catherine. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his tone serious. "I received word today that Zeke Jackson and his gang were spotted near Redemption, about 30 miles north. There have been reports of stagecoach robberies and cattle rustling." Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "The men we encountered in the desert," Xavier nodded. "I'm concerned they might head this way. Jackson has a grudge against me and he saw you and Samuel. I don't want to alarm you, but I wanted you to be aware." The protective instinct that had driven Catherine to carry Samuel across the desert flared within her. "We should leave. I won't put Samuel in danger again." "No," Xavier said firmly. "Running isn't the answer. This is your home now, and the town will protect you both." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like your permission to station a deputy near your cabin at night, just as a precaution." Catherine wanted to argue, to insist they could protect themselves, but the memory of Jackson's cold eyes as he'd looked at her in the desert made her reconsider. "All right," she agreed reluctantly, "but only until this threat has passed." Xavier's relief was evident. "Thank you. Now let's get you home before Samuel returns and wonders where you've gone." As they walked back through town, Catherine found herself hyper-aware of her surroundings, scanning the shadows with newfound wariness. The sense of security she'd been building over the past weeks felt suddenly fragile. Xavier must have sensed her unease because he placed a reassuring hand lightly on her arm. "Try not to worry too much. Jackson is a coward at heart. He preys on the weak and isolated, He'll think twice before causing trouble in a town with a sheriff and deputies." Catherine nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that their brief period of peace was about to be disrupted. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with no sign of the threats that had shadowed Catherine's dreams. She rose early, as had become her habit, and prepared breakfast for Samuel before helping him dress for school. "Will you come see our star maps today?" Samuel asked as she combed his hair. "Miss Winters said parents are invited to see what we've been working on." "I wouldn't miss it," Catherine promised. "I'll come by after the lunch rush at the cafe." Samuel's face lit up. "Sheriff Zimmerman said he'd try to come too. He knows all about the stars from his cattle driving days." Catherine felt a warmth spread through her at Samuel's obvious admiration for Xavier. "Did he now? Well, I'm sure if he promised, he'll be there." After seeing Samuel off with his classmate who carried him to school each day, Catherine headed to the cafe for her morning shift. The routine of preparing food, serving customers, and cleaning tables had become comfortingly familiar, and Mrs. Fleming's cheerful conversation made the work pass quickly. As promised, Catherine left the cafe after the lunch rush and made her way to the schoolhouse. The children's star maps were displayed on the walls, each showing a different constellation with information about its mythology and navigation uses. Samuel's map of the Big Dipper was particularly detailed, showing not only the stars but also how to use them to find the North Star. "He has a real gift for drawing," Miss Winters said, appearing at Catherine's side. "And his mind absorbs information like a sponge. He's already reading at a level far beyond his years." Pride swelled in Catherine's chest. Despite all the hardships, despite his physical limitations, Samuel was thriving. "Thank you for giving him this opportunity," she said sincerely. "It means everything to him, to both of us." "The opportunity is mine," Miss Winters replied. "It's a joy to teach a child so eager to learn." As they spoke, the schoolhouse door opened and Xavier entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. His eyes found Catherine immediately, and he crossed the room to join her. "Sorry I'm late," he apologized. "Had to deal with a dispute between two ranchers, something about a wandering cow." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "Where's our young astronomer?" "Over there." Catherine pointed to where Samuel sat with a group of children, excitedly explaining something about his star map. "He's been looking forward to showing you his work." Xavier's expression softened as he watched Samuel. "He's a remarkable boy." "He is," Catherine agreed, "and he admires you greatly." A flicker of something pleasure, perhaps, or humility crossed Xavier's face. "The feeling is mutual. Shall we go see what he's created?" The afternoon passed pleasantly, with Samuel proudly showing off his work to Catherine and Xavier, and the other children eagerly involving them in their projects. By the time the school day ended, Catherine felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. Xavier insisted on carrying Samuel home, despite the boy's protests that he wasn't a baby. "Humor me," Xavier said with a grin. "It's not every day I get to escort the two most interesting people in Sagebrush Creek." As they approached the cabin, Catherine noticed a man sitting on her porch, a stranger, not one of the deputies Xavier had promised would watch the cabin. Her step faltered, and Xavier immediately tensed, shifting Samuel in his arms to free his right hand. "Stay behind me," he murmured to Catherine. But as they drew closer, the man stood, and Catherine's heart nearly stopped. The weathered face, the graying beard, the familiar stance, it was her father. "Papa!" Samuel's voice broke the silence, filled with disbelief and joy. John Lawson stepped forward, his eyes moving from Samuel to Catherine and back again. "Samuel! Catherine! Is it really you?" Xavier set Samuel down carefully on the porch steps, his expression guarded as he watched the reunion unfold. "Where have you been?" Catherine asked, her voice tight with emotion. "We waited for you. For months we waited." John Lawson's shoulders slumped. "I got caught up in some trouble in Santa Fe, ended up in jail for a spell. When I got out, I went back to the homestead, but you were gone. Been tracking you ever since." "We couldn't stay," Catherine said, the months of worry and fear turning her voice hard. "The well was drying up. We had no food, no money." "I know, and I'm sorry," her father replied, genuine regret in his voice. "I never meant to be gone so long. But I'm here now, and I've come to take you both back." Catherine felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. "Back? Back where?" "I've got a claim near Silver City," John explained. "Good land, close to town. We can start over, be a family again." Samuel looked up at Catherine, his expression torn between hope and uncertainty. Xavier remained silent, but Catherine could feel the tension radiating from him. "May I speak with my father alone?" Catherine asked, directing the question to both Xavier and Samuel. Xavier nodded, helping Samuel into his wheelchair, which they kept on the porch. "I'll take Samuel to get some pie at the cafe. Take all the time you need." As they moved away, Catherine faced her father. "You abandoned us," she said, the words coming out more sharply than she'd intended. "For 8 months, not a word. I had to sell everything we owned to keep Samuel alive. I carried him across the desert when our wagon broke down. Where were you then?" John Lawson's eyes filled with tears. "I made mistakes, Catherine, terrible mistakes, but I never stopped thinking of you both. Never stopped trying to get back to you. And now you expect us to just leave everything and follow you to another uncertain future." Catherine gestured at the cabin at the town beyond. "We have a home here. Samuel is in school, I have work. We're building a life. With the help of that sheriff." Her father asked, a hint of accusation in his tone. "What's he to you?" Catherine bristled. "Someone who helped us when we needed it most. Someone who didn't abandon us." The words hung between them, harsh but true. John Lawson sank onto the porch steps, his head in his hands. "I deserve that," he admitted. "But I'm still your father and I love you both. I want to make amends." Catherine's anger began to fade, replaced by a weary sadness. This man was still her father, still Samuel's father. He had failed them, yes, but he had come back. Didn't that count for something? "Stay in town for a few days," she finally said. "Get to know Samuel again. Let us get to know you. We won't make any decisions immediately." Relief washed over John Lawson's face. "That's fair, more than fair." He stood, reaching out tentatively to touch Catherine's arm. "Thank you for not turning me away. I wouldn't have blamed you if you had." Catherine didn't pull away from his touch, but she didn't lean into it either. "The hotel is just down the street," she said. "Tell them Sheriff Zimmerman sent you. They'll give you a fair rate." As her father walked toward the hotel, Catherine remained on the porch, her emotions in turmoil. The life she and Samuel had begun to build in Sagebrush Creek suddenly felt threatened, not just by Zeke Jackson and his gang, but by the reappearance of the man she had spent months alternately missing and resenting. When Xavier returned with Samuel, the boy was bubbling with excitement about seeing their father again. Catherine forced a smile, not wanting to dampen his happiness, but Xavier wasn't fooled. After Samuel was settled inside with a book, Xavier joined Catherine on the porch. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, his concern evident. Catherine shook her head. "I don't know. I spent so long angry at him, and now he just appears and expects everything to be forgiven." "And you're not ready to forgive," Xavier observed. "No," Catherine admitted. "And I'm not ready to uproot Samuel again for another of my father's schemes. But he's still Samuel's father. I can't just dismiss that." Xavier was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the setting sun. "For what it's worth," he finally said, "I think you're handling this with remarkable grace." Most people wouldn't be as considerate after what you've been through." Catherine looked at him, struck once again by his quiet understanding. "Thank you for everything. I don't know what Samuel and I would have done without you." "You would have managed," Xavier said with a small smile. "You're the strongest person I know, Catherine Lawson." His words warmed her, pushing back the chill of uncertainty that had settled over her since her father's appearance. "Will you join us for dinner tomorrow?" she asked impulsively. "I've invited my father, and I think it would be easier with you there." Xavier's expression softened. "I'd be honored, but are you sure? It's a family matter." "You've become important to us," Catherine said simply. "To both Samuel and me. I'd like my father to understand that." The look in Xavier's eyes made Catherine's heart beat faster, but he simply nodded. "Then I'll be here. Now I should let you rest. It's been quite a day." As Xavier walked away, Catherine felt a curious mix of emotions: anxiety about her father's return, confusion about her own feelings toward Xavier, and beneath it all, a persistent worry about Zeke Jackson and the threat he posed. The following evening arrived more quickly than Catherine would have liked. She had spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, her work at the cafe a welcome distraction from her tumultuous thoughts. Samuel had insisted on going to school despite the excitement of their father's return, which Catherine took as a sign of how important his education had become to him. She had prepared a simple meal, a beef stew with dumplings, fresh bread from the cafe, and an apple pie that Mrs. Fleming had helped her bake. It was the first time she had cooked for guests in their small cabin, and she wanted everything to be perfect, though she couldn't quite articulate why it mattered so much. Xavier arrived first, bearing a bottle of wine and a small carved wooden horse for Samuel. "A peace offering," he said with a smile, handing the wine to Catherine. "And a thank you for the invitation." Before Catherine could respond, there was another knock at the door. John Lawson stood there, his hair combed neatly, wearing what appeared to be a new shirt. He held a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Evening, Catherine," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Sheriff," he added, nodding to Xavier. "Mr. Lawson," Xavier replied politely. Samuel broke the awkward moment by wheeling himself forward. "Papa, come see the book Sheriff Zimmerman gave me about the stars." Dinner proceeded more smoothly than Catherine had dared hope. Samuel chattered happily, filling the silences with stories about school and his friends. John spoke of his time in Silver City, describing the claim he'd staked and the small cabin he'd built there. Xavier contributed occasionally, but seemed content to observe the family dynamics, his eyes often finding Catherine's across the table. After the meal, as Catherine served the pie, her father cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he began, "about what you said yesterday, Catherine, about the life you've built here." He glanced at Samuel, then at Xavier. "I can see it's a good life. Better, maybe, than what I could offer you in Silver City." Catherine stilled, the pie server poised over the dish. "What are you saying, Papa?" John Lawson looked directly at his daughter. "I'm saying maybe I don't need to take you away from here. Maybe I could stay instead." The pronouncement hung in the air, and Catherine felt a mix of relief and apprehension. "Stay in Sagebrush Creek, if you'll have me," her father replied. "I've got some savings now, honest money," he added quickly, glancing at Xavier. "Enough to maybe buy a small piece of land outside town. Start a horse ranch, perhaps, something stable." Xavier leaned forward slightly. "As it happens, the Thompson place about 3 miles west of town is for sale. Good land, small house, barns in decent repair. Owner's moving to California to be with his daughter." John looked surprised, then thoughtful. "I'd like to see it if that's possible." "I can take you out there tomorrow," Xavier offered, "if that suits." Catherine watched this exchange with growing astonishment. Her father, who had always chased the next opportunity, the next big strike, was talking about settling down. And Xavier, who had every reason to be suspicious of John Lawson, was offering to help him. "What about your claim in Silver City?" she asked her father. John shrugged. "I can sell it. It's the silver that's valuable, not the land itself." His expression softened as he looked at Samuel. "Besides, what good is a claim if I'm not with my family?" Samuel's face lit up with hope. "You mean we could all live here, together?" "If that's what you want, son," John replied, ruffling Samuel's hair. "And if your sister agrees." All eyes turned to Catherine. She felt the weight of the decision, not just for herself but for Samuel, for her father, and in some indefinable way, for Xavier as well. "I think," she said slowly, choosing her words with care, "that we should take this one step at a time. See the Thompson place. Talk about what it would mean for all of us." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was a cautious opening of a door that Catherine had thought firmly closed. The evening ended with tentative plans for the next day. John would stay at the hotel one more night, and Xavier would take him to see the Thompson property in the morning. Catherine would join them after her shift at the cafe. After her father left, Xavier lingered, helping Catherine clear the table despite her protests. "You don't have to do that," she insisted. "You're our guest." "I don't mind," Xavier replied, stacking plates with practiced ease. "Besides, I wanted a moment to speak with you alone." Catherine set down the pot she was holding, suddenly nervous. "About my father," Xavier nodded, his expression serious. "I've made inquiries about him, sent telegrams to contacts in Santa Fe and Silver City." A chill ran through Catherine. "And did you find something?" "Nothing concerning," Xavier assured her. "His story checks out. He was indeed jailed for brawling, not for anything more serious, and he does hold a legitimate claim near Silver City." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I believe he's sincere in his desire to make amends. But I also believe you're right to be cautious." Relief mingled with a touch of resentment in Catherine's heart. "You investigated my father. I investigate anyone who might pose a threat to this town," Xavier said evenly, "or to people I care about." The simple declaration hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Catherine found herself at a loss for words, torn between gratitude for his concern and confusion about the depth of feeling implied by his statement. "I should go," Xavier said after a moment, breaking the tension. "Deputy Wilson will be watching the cabin tonight. If you need anything, just signal with a lamp in the window." Catherine nodded, walking him to the door. "Thank you for coming tonight. It meant a lot to Samuel." She hesitated, then added softly, "and to me." Xavier's gaze held hers for a heartbeat, longer than necessary. "Good night, Catherine." As she watched him walk away, Catherine acknowledged to herself what she had been trying to deny, that her feelings for Xavier Zimmerman had grown beyond gratitude, beyond friendship. Somehow, in the weeks since he had found her carrying Samuel across the desert, the steady, honorable sheriff had carved out a place in her heart. But with her father's return and the lingering threat of Zeke Jackson, Catherine wondered if there was room in her life for yet another complication, no matter how welcome it might be. The following morning brought a complication of an entirely different sort. Catherine had just arrived at the cafe when Mrs. Fleming rushed in from the street, her face flushed with excitement and worry. "There's been a shooting at the saloon," she exclaimed. "One of Zeke Jackson's men, they're saying. Sheriff Zimmerman's got him locked up, but Jackson and the rest of his gang are still out there." Catherine's heart raced. "Is the sheriff all right? Was anyone hurt?" "Sheriff's fine," Mrs. Fleming assured her. "And no one else was hurt, thank the Lord, but the whole town's on edge. People are saying Jackson might try to break his man out of jail." Catherine thought of Xavier, facing this danger alone, and of Samuel, vulnerable at school. "I need to get Samuel," she said, already moving toward the door. "Wait," Mrs. Fleming caught her arm. "The sheriff sent word. All the children are being kept at the school with armed deputies watching over them. He said it's the safest place for them right now." "And my father?" Catherine asked. "He's at the jail with the sheriff, I believe, volunteered to help guard the prisoner." This news surprised Catherine. Her father, offering to stand with Xavier against Zeke Jackson. It seemed out of character for the man who had always chosen the path of least resistance. "I should go there," Catherine decided. Mrs. Fleming looked alarmed. The sheriff was quite clear that everyone should stay inside, away from the streets. Catherine hesitated, torn between her desire to be with the men she cared about and the practical knowledge that she would be more of a liability than a help in a potential gunfight. "Then I'll stay and help with breakfast," she conceded. "But if anything happens, you'll be the first to know," Mrs. Fleming promised. The morning dragged on with agonizing slowness. Customers came and went, bringing snippets of news and wild speculation. By noon, the tension in the town was palpable. The streets were eerily quiet, with most people staying indoors and businesses operating with front doors locked. It was mid-afternoon when the cafe door burst open and Xavier strode in, his expression grim. "Catherine," he said without preamble. "I need you to come with me, now." Mrs. Fleming gasped. "What's happened?" "Jackson and his men have been spotted on the edge of town," Xavier replied, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face. "I'm moving everyone who might be a target to the church. It's the most defensible building in town." "Samuel," Catherine began. "Already there," Xavier assured her. "Your father's with him. I've got deputies stationed around the building." Catherine untied her apron with trembling hands. "Why would I be a target?" Xavier's expression darkened. "Jackson was in the saloon this morning before we arrested his man. He was asking questions about you and Samuel, about your relationship with me." A cold dread settled in Catherine's stomach. "He means to use us against you." "That's my fear," Xavier confirmed. "Which is why I need you somewhere safe, somewhere I can protect you." Mrs. Fleming urged Catherine toward the door. "Go, child. I'll lock up here and join you shortly." The walk to the church was tense, with Xavier scanning the rooftops and alleyways continuously, his hand never far from his gun. When they arrived, Catherine was relieved to find Samuel safe, sitting with her father and several other children from the school. The church was filled with women, children, and elderly townsfolk, while able-bodied men stood guard at the doors and windows. "Cat." Samuel called when he saw her, his face lighting up. "Sheriff Zimmerman says we might get to see a real gunfight." "That's enough, son," John Lawson said, placing a restraining hand on Samuel's shoulder. "This isn't a game." Xavier pulled Catherine aside, his voice low and urgent. "I need to join my deputies. We've set up barricades at the main entrances to town. With luck, we can keep Jackson and his gang from getting any further." "And if you can't?" Catherine asked, fear evident in her voice. "Then we fight," Xavier said simply, "but you'll be safe here." "I've made sure of it." Catherine grasped his arm, unwilling to let him go just yet. "Be careful, Xavier, please." Something flickered in his eyes, determination, perhaps, or a deeper emotion that Catherine dared not name. "I will," he promised. Then, in a move that surprised them both, he leaned forward and pressed a swift, gentle kiss to her forehead. "For luck," he murmured before turning and striding toward the door. John Lawson appeared at Catherine's side as Xavier left. "He's a good man," he observed quietly. "Better than I gave him credit for." Catherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "He loves you, you know," her father continued. "Any fool can see that." Catherine turned to him, startled. "Papa, it's not my place to interfere," John said, raising his hands in a placating gesture. But life's too short for regrets, Catherine. I should know. Before Catherine could respond, a commotion at the door drew their attention. One of Xavier's deputies burst in, his face pale. "Jackson's men have broken through the north barricade," he announced. "Sheriff Zimmerman requests that everyone move to the basement." A ripple of fear passed through the crowd as people began gathering children and belongings. Catherine hurried to Samuel, helping him into his wheelchair as her father collected his books and blanket. "Is Sheriff Zimmerman all right?" Samuel asked, his earlier excitement replaced by worry. "I'm sure he is," Catherine assured him, though her own heart was racing with fear. "He's very good at his job." As they joined the procession heading for the basement stairs, a series of gunshots rang out, alarmingly close. Women screamed and children began to cry. Catherine looked desperately toward the door, torn between getting Samuel to safety and her concern for Xavier. "Go," her father urged, taking control of Samuel's wheelchair. "I'll get him downstairs. You wait here for word from the sheriff." Catherine hesitated only a moment before nodding gratefully. She moved to one side of the church, positioning herself near a window where she could see part of the main street without being easily visible from outside. The scene that greeted her was chaotic. Men crouched behind water troughs and wagons, exchanging gunfire with unseen assailants. Smoke hung in the air, and the sharp crack of gunshots punctuated the eerie silence between volleys. Catherine scanned the street anxiously, looking for Xavier's familiar figure. She spotted him finally, directing a group of townsmen who were moving a wagon to create a better barricade. Relief flooded through her, only to turn to ice as she saw a man on a rooftop across the street taking aim at Xavier. Without conscious thought, Catherine flung open the window. "Xavier!" she screamed. "Above you!" Xavier reacted instantly, diving to the side as a bullet struck the ground where he had been standing. He rolled to his feet, gun drawn, and fired 3 rapid shots at the rooftop. The sniper jerked backward, then tumbled from his perch to land with a sickening thud in the street below. Catherine sagged against the window frame, her legs suddenly weak. Xavier glanced toward the church, his eyes finding hers across the distance. He nodded once acknowledgement, thanks, perhaps something more before turning back to the battle. A hand on her shoulder made Catherine jump. It was one of the deputies. "Miss Lawson, you need to get downstairs now. It's not safe up here." Catherine allowed herself to be led to the basement where she found Samuel and her father waiting anxiously. "Did you see the sheriff?" Samuel asked immediately. "I did," Catherine confirmed, forcing a reassuring smile. "He's doing fine." The basement of the church was crowded and dimly lit, with families huddled together on benches and blankets spread on the floor. The sounds of the gunfight were muffled but still audible, each shot causing the women to flinch and the children to burrow closer to their mothers. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Catherine sat with Samuel's head in her lap, stroking his hair as he dozed fitfully. Her father paced nearby, occasionally pausing to listen at the top of the stairs. It was full dark when the church door above opened, and footsteps sounded on the wooden floor. Everyone in the basement tensed, eyes fixed on the stairway. Then came a voice, Xavier's voice. "It's over," he called down. "Jackson and his men have been driven off. You can all come up now." The relief in the room was palpable. People hugged each other, some weeping with joy, others simply sagging with exhaustion. Catherine roused Samuel and, with her father's help, got him back into his wheelchair. When they reached the main floor of the church, Catherine's eyes immediately sought Xavier. He stood near the door, his shirt torn and dirty, a bandage wrapped hastily around his left forearm, but otherwise whole. When he saw Catherine and Samuel, a smile broke through his weary expression. "You're all right," Catherine said, her voice catching. "Thanks to you," Xavier replied. "If you hadn't warned me about that shooter," he left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. "What about Jackson?" John Lawson asked, stepping forward. Xavier's expression darkened. "Got away along with 2 of his men. The rest are either dead or in custody." "Will he come back?" Samuel asked, his young face serious. Xavier crouched down to Samuel's level, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "I don't think so. He lost too many men today. But even if he does, we'll be ready for him. This town protects its own." The words were meant for Samuel, but Xavier's eyes found Catherine's as he spoke, and she felt the truth of them in her heart. This town, these people had become their own. In just a few weeks, Sagebrush Creek had given them more than just shelter. It had given them a home, a community, a future. As the townspeople began to disperse, returning to their homes or helping with the wounded, Xavier approached Catherine. "I need to see to my deputies and the prisoners," he said, "but afterward may I call on you? There are things I'd like to say." Catherine nodded, unable to trust her voice. The events of the day, the fear and relief, the realization of how close she had come to losing him, it was overwhelming. John Lawson cleared his throat. "I'll take Samuel home," he offered. "Get him settled. You two take your time." Catherine looked at her father, surprised by his perceptiveness and his tacit approval. "Thank you, Papa." It was nearly midnight when Xavier finally came to the cabin. Catherine had been waiting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the night chill, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She stood as he approached, noting his clean shirt and damp hair. He had taken the time to wash away the grime of the battle. "How is your arm?" she asked as he joined her on the porch. "Just a graze," Xavier assured her, flexing his hand to demonstrate. "Doc Stevens patched it up, said I'd live to fight another day." His attempt at levity fell flat, and he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It was too close today, Catherine. Too many people could have been hurt." "But they weren't," Catherine reminded him. "Because of you, because of the town coming together." Xavier nodded, acknowledging her words even as his expression remained troubled. "Jackson got away. He could come back." "And if he does, we'll face him," Catherine said firmly. "Together." Xavier's gaze sharpened at her words, studying her face in the pale moonlight. "Together," he repeated softly. "Is that what you want, Catherine?" Catherine felt the weight of the question, understood what he was truly asking. Her father's words from earlier echoed in her mind. "Life's too short for regrets." "Yes," she said simply. "It's what I want, what I've wanted for some time now." Xavier stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "When I found you in the desert," he said, his voice low and intense, "carrying Samuel on your back, determined to save him no matter the cost to yourself, I knew then that you were extraordinary. Everything I've learned about you since has only confirmed that." Catherine leaned into his touch, her heart pounding. "I thought you were a mirage at first," she admitted. "When you appeared on that horse like something out of a dream. And when I said I'd carry you both," Xavier continued, "I meant it. Not just then, but always, if you'll let me." Catherine felt tears sting her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I would," she whispered. "I do." Xavier's smile was luminous in the darkness as he lowered his head, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that spoke of tenderness and passion, of promises made and kept. Catherine wound her arms around his neck, letting herself be fully present in this moment of perfect clarity. When they finally parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Catherine Lawson," he said, his voice steady and sure. "You and Samuel both. I want to build a life with you here, if that's what you want too." Catherine smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "It's exactly what I want." The days and weeks that followed brought many changes to Catherine's life. Her father purchased the Thompson property and set about restoring it, proving himself more reliable and steadfast than Catherine had dared hope. Samuel continued to thrive in school, his natural intelligence and cheerful nature making him popular among his peers despite his physical limitations. And Xavier was a constant, steady presence in their lives. He courted Catherine properly, with dinner invitations and Sunday walks, always respectful of her independence, even as he made his devotion clear. The town watched their courtship with approving smiles, unsurprised when, 3 months after the shootout, Xavier proposed properly, going down on one knee in front of the cafe where Catherine still worked. Their wedding, held in the same church where they had sheltered during Jackson's attack, was attended by the entire town. Samuel served as best man, proudly wheeling himself down the aisle ahead of his sister. John Lawson, tears in his eyes, gave his daughter away with a mixture of joy and regret for the years he had missed. "He'll never replace your mother," John told Catherine the night before the wedding, "but he'll be a good husband to you and a good father to Samuel, a better man than I was, I think." Catherine had hugged her father, forgiving him finally and completely. "You came back to us," she said. "That's what matters now." As Catherine stood beside Xavier, reciting vows of love and faithfulness, she thought of the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the desperation of carrying Samuel across the desert to the joy of building a life in Sagebrush Creek. It had been a path marked by hardship, but ultimately leading to happiness. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Xavier kissed her for the first time as her husband, Catherine felt the last piece of her heart fall into place. She had carried her brother to save his life, and Xavier had carried them both into a future brighter than she could have imagined. 5 years later, Catherine stood on the porch of their home, the sheriff's house expanded to accommodate their growing family, watching as Xavier taught their 3-year-old daughter, Rose, to ride her first pony. Samuel, now 17 and as bright as ever despite his continuing inability to walk, sat nearby, sketching the scene with the talent that had begun to earn him recognition beyond Sagebrush Creek. John Lawson, his hair now fully gray but his steps still vigorous, rode up the path, leading a handsome colt. "For my granddaughter," he announced proudly, "when she's ready for a proper horse." Xavier lifted Rose from her pony and carried her over to admire her grandfather's gift. Catherine watched them, her father, her husband, her daughter, her brother, and felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. Zeke Jackson had never returned to Sagebrush Creek. Rumors placed him in Mexico, or dead in a shootout in Texas, or reformed and ranching in Colorado. It didn't matter to Catherine. The threat he had once posed had faded into memory, overshadowed by the life she and Xavier had built together. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink much like the day Xavier had first kissed her, Catherine felt her husband's arm slip around her waist. "Happy?" he asked, his voice still able to send a shiver through her after all these years. Catherine leaned into his embrace, thinking of the day he had found her in the desert, of his words that had changed her life. She carried a crippled boy on her back. "I'll carry you both." "Yes," she replied, turning to kiss him softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible." And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Catherine knew that whatever burdens the future might bring, they would carry them together just as they always had, just as they always would.